Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum and welcome. And Ramadan Mubarak to those observing. My name is Basima Sizemore, and I'm a senior researcher in the Global Justice Program at the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. And I am a co-designer for the Arab Women and Feminist Visions for Equity and Belonging webinar series. It's our pleasure to have you join us today for the first webinar of the series, which is being held to coincide with International Women's Day, also known as International Working Women's Day on March 8th. And we want to start the session and conversation today by honoring and acknowledging the histories, achievements, and the current moment of women around the globe struggling for social, cultural, economic, and political change to advance women's rights, gender equity, labor rights, human rights, and the health of our planet. In honor of International Women's Day, the theme of today's webinar is on rights, equity, dignity, and social justice, and the conversation will focus on Arab women and feminist-led movements and their role within society in the Arab region in shaping civic life and social and political progress in the Arab region to advance, as the title suggests, rights, equity, dignity, and social justice. Additionally, the conversation today will uplift the intersectionality of Arab women and feminist movements and struggles as they strategize for social and political progress for women and society as a whole. I would also like to take a moment to make an acknowledgement regarding this series, in that in designing this series, we've strived for a diverse representation of topics, struggles, geographies, identities, expertise, lived experiences, and histories as related to Arab women and feminists living in the Arab region and diaspora. And we fully acknowledge that this series barely touches the surface of the many topics that can and should be centered in these conversations. And each session is designed to provide a small window or glimpse into the immense diversity of Arabs and Arabic-speaking peoples that create the rich cultures, identities, histories, social and political fabric of the 22 Arab countries that span East, North, Sub-Saharan Africa, and West Asia that constitute what we know as the Arab region. We would also like to acknowledge our OBI colleagues in our communications team and Lara Haboub on the Democracy and Belonging Forum team for their close collaboration and support on this series. And we'd also like to thank the Sultan Program of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at UC Berkeley for partially funding this webinar series. And of course, to thank our incredible speakers and our moderator for being here with us today and for participating in this inaugural event. I'd now like to invite my dear colleague and Global Justice Program Director, El-Sadiq El-Sheikh, who is a co-designer for this project and webinar series, to introduce and provide some context to the Global South Lab, which this webinar series is a part of and that we're publicly launching today. El-Sadiq, please come on. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Basima. Hello, everybody. I will try to be brief. Our world today is filled with all sorts of othering across the global governance systems and international relations. To minimize such outcome, for over a century, generation of global South thinkers, public intellectuals, movements, and civic institutions have called for imagining a different world outside of the dominant political, social, and ontological thoughts of the global North. They argue that such a modality exists within and throughout the global South's historical and contemporary diverse cosmopolity and imagination of world making. Almost 90% of the world population lives in the global South. At the same time, the region is not merely a geographical location, but a truly global project that has long been ignored, it is knowledge being concealed, and it is vision deliberately being marginalized. The Global South has unmatched social and natural diversity and varying degrees of economic and political development and governance systems. And the multifaceted experiences and perspective of the Global South would contribute significantly significantly to a more inclusive and equitable world. This reality underscores the importance of the Global South's role, not as a passive participant, but as a critical co-creator of today's and future design of global governance systems. As such, our lab, the Global South, past, present, and future of worldmaking, is a platform for engaging with the Global South social actors and institutions. It is dedicated to unearthing the wealth of Global South experiences, perspectives, and visions. We aim to foster mutual understanding, respect, and deeper bridging that will help improve people's life and preserving our planet. To do so, we will partner with social actors, institutions, and movements across the Global South to bring together a wide range of perspectives and visions from the Global South to engage with global citizens, both in the South and in the North, on contemporary challenges to build common strategies that envision a future where everyone and everything belong. Furthermore, the lab's activities, which will include lectures, interviews, and webinar series like the one you will be watching today, will focus on the need to uplift and disseminate knowledge so that global citizens can learn from each other, contribute, and co-create strategies to realize such a future. But more than just a platform for learning and discussion, the lab will also serve as an incubator space where future global citizens' strategies and cooperation could emerge. I will encourage you to follow us and share your ideas with us. Thank you. Back to you, Basima.
Thank you, El-Sadiq. And I'll just underscore the intentionality behind the Global South Lab and this series, and that both the series and the lab are part of a larger effort at the Othering and Belonging Institute, as El-Sadiq illuminated, to create platforms where global citizens can learn from each other, contribute, and co-create common strategies that envision a future where everyone and everything belong. So thank you for being on this journey with us. This three-part public webinar series, Arab Women and Feminist Visions for Equity and Belonging, focuses on Arab women and feminist-led efforts and their essential roles within society in the region in shaping civic life and social and political progress in the Arab region. Women and feminists throughout the region and diaspora, representing different countries, lived experiences, struggles, and identities, will share their knowledge and expertise in advancing social and political change, democratization, women's rights and gender justice, knowledge production, food sovereignty, land rights, and much more, while simultaneously centering their voices and demands for rights, equity, and justice for all. And so that's a little bit of a teaser of the webinars and conversations to come that we'll have in April and in May. And of course, we'll send out more information to join those. And this is also an invitation and effort to center global South perspectives and voices that are often underrepresented. And for this series in particular, we want to reflect the priorities of Arab women and feminists and their visions, values, and strategies toward equity, justice, belonging, and world making, as well as to broaden narratives and perspectives beyond a Western narrative and Western public opinion pertaining to Arab women, Arab peoples, Arab societies, and the Arab region at large. And as I wrap up, I have a quick note on housekeeping in that following our conversation today with the speakers, there'll be 15 minutes towards the end for questions to be brought forth from the audience and shared with the speakers to answer. So please continue throughout the event to add your questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to share those with the speakers. With that, I'd like to transition to our conversation with our incredible speakers. And I'll start by introducing our moderator for today's session, Leila Hassini. And it is my honor to introduce Leila. Leila is a Pan-African feminist organizer and strategist of Algerian heritage with over 30 years of experience working at the intersections of philanthropy, organizing, research, and advocacy. Leila was born in Algeria and educated in the United States, France, and Morocco, and she has lived and worked in over 40 countries across Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the United States. Leila currently works as a senior strategist with philanthropic foundations, feminist funds, social justice movements, and women's rights organizations across Africa and the Middle East to advance social justice and rights-based resourcing and movement strategies. Thank you, Leila, for being here with us today and for moderating this conversation. I pass it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Basima, for the warm welcome and the introduction. And thank you all who are on this call today for taking time to be part of this conversation. It's an essential conversation and so important in the context that we are in today. And so I'm thrilled to share this platform with the three panelists. Siwar Dos, who is a Tunisian human rights defender who currently works at the Global Fund for Women as the manager of their feminist crisis response. We have Wafa El Mustafa, who's a journalist and an advocate for people who have been forcibly disappeared and are missing in Syria, and works on a range of women's rights issues. And then Yanar Mohammed, who is an Iraqi feminist activist and co-founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. And so it's great to be part of this panel and to have the representation from North Africa, as well as the Middle East or the Swana region, Southwest Asia, North Africa, on this call. So I'd like to begin just with a question around kind of positionality and framing. We know that the personal is political. And so I'd like to ask each of you, starting with you, Siwar, can you describe your journey that led you to the current work that you're doing? What has your journey been in terms of engagement with the feminist and women's rights movement? Siwar, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Leila, and welcome everyone. Very honored to be here, and just like very happy to have these conversations, as we know as how much important it is, particularly during these times. Well, my journey into global South, let's say feminism, activism, and practice was shaped really by the sense of contradiction, let's say. I grew up in Tunisia. I witnessed how women were both central to society, respected as knowledge holders, the ones who transferred traditions and wisdom, but at the same time systematically denied equal rights. Unlike the Western patriarchy, Arab patriarchy actually prioritizes male and elder rights, meaning that as women, as they age, they gain more authority and respect. However, this respect is often conditional. It exists within a structure that upholds male privilege, limiting women's agency. So from a young age, I really found refuge in the works of Arab feminists like Nawal Saadawi. Like, she named what I had felt, but could not yet articulate. I was too young to articulate what I was feeling, that the discrimination I witnessed, experienced was not personal, it's not imagined, it was systematic. And Nawal really confirmed to me repeatedly through her writings that I was not crazy nor like hysterical. I was just not blinded by patriarchy. She gave me language to trust my own reality. And from there, I never really stopped questioning, resisting, imagining alternatives. A very big event that has really was a turning point for me personally was the Tunisian Revolution in 2011. It was more than political uprising. It was a collective reawakening, it questioned decades of oppression and allowed for spaces to reimagine what was possible, not only in governance, but in gender roles, power, justice. The streets really became places where Tunisian feminist ideas could be articulated in our own terms, rooted in culturally owned representations of womanhood, of autonomy, of dignity. Women and also socially gender non-conforming people flooded the streets, not as separate voices from the revolution, but as an integral part of it. It wasn't just like an us versus them, because I always struggle to hearing this of like, as if like it's a binary thinking, but it was a call for our community to unite in reclaiming dignity, rights, and belonging. Noting as Arabs, community is everything for us. We cherish and rely on our community as a strong support system. So the revolution made it clear that social justice could not be achieved without gender justice. Yet, as its political transition unfolded, became equally clear that women's demands were being sidelined. And I think this is really not particular to Tunisia, but everywhere globally. Even those who had marched for change alongside us were quick to label feminist struggles as secondary, as something that could wait. So through my studies, I studied also gender, and I worked in feminist organizations, both in Tunisia and also now I'm holding a global position. I came to see how feminist struggles in Tunisia and the broader Arab region are often misrepresented, particularly in global discourse. Like in one of my research, I examined the movement against gender-based violence in Tunisia, which is commonly falsely portrayed as a byproduct by the global Me Too movement. But in reality, Tunisian women and also other Arab women have been speaking out long before the Me Too movement became mainstream. The feminist consciousness that emerged post-revolution was not an important idea. It was deeply rooted in local struggles, from resisting the colonial French oppression to independence, to challenging authoritarian regimes, to fighting gender-based violence in all its forms. So this realization of that women's resistance is often erased or co-opted, shaped by my commitment to my current role, working now on feminist crisis response at the Global Fund for Women. Today, I work with movements across the MENA region, but also globally, supporting women in moments of crisis, whether it's at war, displacement, political repression, climate crisis, or economic collapse. I tend to always view crises as moments of transformational awakening or opportunities for transformational justice. That's how I keep doing the work that I'm doing. I also think that it's also about power, really shifting power. What's important. It's also disrupting systems that sustain oppression and building collective strategies for liberation. And also, it's very important to know that dismantling the entire system that sustains inequality, it's the patriarchy, the state, the economy, the neo-colonial structures that dictate the conditions of our oppression. So for me, it's not really a theoretical exercise, it's a survival strategy. It's a survival strategy. It's a way of ensuring that women, particularly those most marginalized, do not remain invisible. It's about holding space for grief, anger, resistance, and a lot of joy, honestly. And it's also about never allowing those who benefit from our silence to make us doubt what we know for sure, what we know to be true.
Thank you, Sivar. Thank you so much for that. And maybe we can share, Basima, some of like Nawal El-Sadawi, who hopefully many of you know, who was, unfortunately she's passed, but a prominent Egyptian writer, feminist, physician, who wrote some of the most groundbreaking work about the realities of Egyptian women's lives. And maybe what we can do is share in the chat some of the women and feminists, the names that have influenced us and who've also been translated into English for a US audience. So thank you so much, Siwar. You've raised so many great points that we'll come back to later on in this conversation. And Wafa, I'd like to invite you to address the same question, please.
Thank you so much, Leila. And of course, it's an honor to be here. I said this when we were preparing the event. I'm really, really flattered to be, speaking today among such incredible activists and women. I think what I share with Siwar is the moment of the revolution. And I think this is something many women in the region share. The revolutions in our region were like a moment, of course, it depends on how old we were. But I think for many of us who were, old enough to take part in the revolution, all revolutions starting in 2011, that was a moment of, as also Siwar said, like awakening moment for everything, about everything, about ourselves, about the meaning of, about the meaning of existence, and about the meaning of any action or, all actions we can or we're trying to do. And I think, for me, I grew up in a household of like, 3 sisters, and, my family was, for so long, I grew up in a quiet, open-minded, I would say, city in Syria. near the city of Hama, and my hometown is called Masyaf. It's a very diverse town, on all levels. But for so long, I think I grew up thinking that was the norm of, everywhere in Syria, the way I was raised, the way I was empowered by my father and my mother. I thought that was the norm. And I think the revolution was also a moment of confronting the different realities in Syria, the realities of different women in different places and different backgrounds. And I think, the revolution on all levels was the moment for me that made me think of myself as a woman who can, take action that can, contribute to changing the reality of all women and all people in the country. It was also the moment of, me, I would say maybe like redefining, politics and political actions and the different roles, gender roles we had in Syria in different places. It was also a moment of, reality, because, as I said, Syria is a very, very diverse country, but we were, for so long, of dictatorship of the Assad regime, we were separated. We were forced to be separated, so we fear each other, so we don't know each other, so we, everyone is just, everyone is just like, our existence was just reduced to the daily basis survival. So, not even thinking about any political action or any political meaning. But unfortunately, also, in 2013, 2 years after the start of the Syrian revolution, my father got kidnapped or arrested by the Assad regime from Damascus. And that was also another moment that, changed my life, I would say, and changed, I think, the life of, my whole family in my community. But it was also a moment of, it was a huge shift, to be honest, because a lot had to happen afterwards. My father got arrested, and we're a family of, 3 sisters and my mother. And then I was the eldest, and I had to take care of the family. I had to arrange, us fleeing the country with, my sister who was 13 at that point. And then I realized for the first time, for example, that women in Syria, mothers, were not allowed to leave the country with underage kids without the consent of the father. And, in the case of, the father being arrested by the authority, it was a huge, challenge. It was, something I didn't really know about before. And I had, to learn about, and I had to confront, and I had to take action about. So we had to flee the country illegally. And then, unfortunately, we fled to Turkey. And then we had to, we fled with nothing, like many, many other families of detainees who were, big number of the detainees in Syria were men. So that meant that, those who were left behind were mainly women, mothers with kids who, and then women who had to take care of the kids, who had to leave the country, mostly illegally, who had to leave to another, to a new country with nothing and start from scratch and, build a new life for the kids, but still at the same time live this parallel reality of, having to search for your husband, or like for your father, or for your brother, or, for your relatives. And it's unfortunately, it's been a very, very difficult journey. Being, just a family of 3 women in a new country, of course, expose you to, all kind of, exploitations and challenges and difficulties. I was 23 back then. I had to work, for like 19 hours to support my family financially, and still also pay money, unfortunately, to, war merchants who were, seeking, who were exploiting our suffering. They would come to us asking for money in exchange of information that, of course, unfortunately, were not true. But we also had to pay for that, because we could not just, refuse it. So I would say, I think that was, that stage after my father's disappearance shaped my, my vision and the lens I I used and I still use today to look at myself, to look at every action I do, to look at other women, and also to understand political change, and understand maybe change not only in my own country, but in the region and in the South, in the global South, but also to understand my role as someone who comes from the global South and lives today in the global North for political reasons.
Thank you so much, Wafa. That was so rich with so much information about your personal journey and what it means to stay in a country, what it means to leave a country, what it means to move to a third country, and what kind of infrastructure and support does or doesn't exist. So much food for thought. Thank you so much for sharing at a very personal level. Yanar, I'll now come to you.
Thank you, Layla, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you. And I mean, it's a very long journey. It's not a day or two. And as you can tell, I'm a bit older than the other women in this call. So where to start from? I would like to also mention something that when we're speaking about Arab women, and I'm glad that Basima mentioned Arab-speaking women, because many of our countries have an ethnic and a beautiful racial mix where we are Arab-speaking and the language gets us together, but many ethnicities, many races are mixed, and therefore comes the name Iraq. Iraq in Arabic is Iraq. It's not just one race, but many races combined together, and gives that richness to a people where I don't want to say go back to Mesopotamia, but it was beautiful that we lived at a time when nobody asked anybody, what's your religion or what's your ethnicity, but we know by the language that we speak and by the cuisine that we have in our homes, where we share everything. So Arab-speaking woman, and from here I go on to the other points. If I want to remember the first steps of my journey, I would say as a young girl, the gender differences and the imbalance of treating kids in a family based on their gender bothered me since a very long time, since I was very young. I felt that the privileges were always for the males, and that servitude and other designated descriptions are for the women. Like if a girl or a woman is not pretty or does not serve well at home, she's not worth much at home. So some of us have more of that feminist chemistry in them since they are very young. And you believe that you can liberate yourself by studying, by establishing yourself, and therefore be independent. And Iraq as a country offered that independence more to women than, I would say, countries in the region. We were able to have economic independence and the education. But going back to the steps that got me to where I am, I would say it only takes one bad marriage to make you understand that you are supposed to be a less person in that social relationship, and that everybody expects you to accept the oppression because it's the norm, just like my colleague said. Having been introduced to revolutionary literature that describes the oppression of women and compares it to the oppression of working class upon the hands of the exploiters, I would say feminism was built basically, my feminism was built basically on Nawal Saadawi, but also got richer by learning revolutionary analysis of oppression. And I would jump here to the year to the year 1995 when I had to leave Iraq because Saddam Hussein made life for us intolerable in Iraq, and I found myself in the West. And then the other moment was when the American bombs were bombing Baghdad, the carpet bombing all over. That's when your not only your dignity as a woman, but as an Iraqi gets ruptured, that you feel that you have to do something. So it only took one telephone call for a friend who suggested that a women's organization is needed in Iraq. And I found myself flying there, founding a women's organization, and then trying to understand and also to visualize what the Iraq that we deserve should look like. And in my imagination, I thought women have to be equal to men. Women should not be suffering from oppression, but also occupation should not have happened in the first place. And at the time, they used to tell us, if not for the West coming and liberating Iraq, what would you have done? My answer is that the Arab Spring came, and another Arab Spring will come. And here I am saying Arab, but maybe I should say Middle Eastern. So other moments that really affected me were after we set up, me and the other women on the organization set up shelters for women. I remember a girl who I like to call her Basma, that's not her real name, coming as a broken individual who the society took everything from her, left her with nothing. Cut hair, no dignity. She didn't weigh like anything at all, coming into our shelter. And then after 6 months, stepping out of the shelter looking like a Hollywood actress, that beautiful. That social transformation, when you build when you turn a broken person into a strong and fierce feminist who can change the future for generations of females to come, and those fierce feminists who will not be told that they are the other and that they do not belong to their society, those females can shape the future. I believe I'm in that moment to stay, and I will keep on working on it until it becomes a reality in Iraq. Now, the occupation of Iraq divided us as a society, and they knew exactly how to divide us based on religion, based on ethnicity, based on sectarianism, and turned us into small groups who are at the throat of each other. But I believe feminists will be part of the solution, and it might take many other years to come. So there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yanar. And thank you for reminding us how, unfortunately, the diversity of our region gets reduced often to Arab, to Islam, to certain realities that get surfaced in the US in particular, since this is the audience we're addressing here, and that we need to really think about the diverse history and her stories of our region, the diverse realities of our regions, the incredible pluralism that exists and has existed over time. And I think it's important also to recognize where we've come from. So many of you, Siwa and Wafa, we spoke about the revolutions. We know that the seeds for this revolution and that women's and feminist involvement have been part of the rich history of our region. And women have shown up as writers. In Morocco, the first university was created by a woman. Women were very deeply involved in the revolutionary struggles across the region. This isn't always known, but we know it, those of us who have studied the region. And so I'd like each of you to talk about a little bit the feminist, her stories that we know about. What have feminists and women been involved in terms of the history of activism in the different countries and regions that we're part of? And I'll start with you, Wafa, if you could begin.
Sure.
Thank you.
I mean, let me start by saying, I think, and this is something we all agree on, it's difficult for me to speak about like any historical context that is, related to any cause or any topic in Syria, as if, Syria has always been the country that we know of today. Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and other places, we were all like, it was the same area, and then, a British-French agreement by two men decided to, divide us into what we know, or maybe what we identify as today, as Syrians or Iraqis or Egyptians or whatever. But maybe I can, this, after saying this, I can maybe just say a few information about, at least in the region and the area that is known today as Syria. Feminist movement started in the late 19th century during what is called the Arab Nahda, the Arab Renaissance, which was like a period of cultural revival, and it was not only limited to Syria, but also reached Egypt and Lebanon and other places. And I think at that point the main demands of this movement in Syria was for calls for basic rights, like the right to education and the right to vote. I can just maybe mention just two names. We know of Mariana Marash, and she was one of the first Arab women to publish in newspapers advocating for women's emancipation and intellectual engagement. We also know of Mary Al-Hajami and Adila Bayham, and they both worked in women cultural and social organizations. And in Syria, as we know it today, women gained the right to vote in the year 1953. But unfortunately, it all goes back to the moment of revolution, when the Ba'ath Party came to Syria, and then the Assad, of course, and then after a series of military coups, the Assad regime took over in the year 1970. And I mean, it's still unbelievable to say that this dictatorship has just ended a few months ago after 54 years of ruling and destroying the country. Of course, they throughout these years, the Assad regime, the father, and then Assad, the son, they suppressed, co-opted, and of course controlled all feminists in any, not only feminists, any women activism, any women movement in Syria. Of course, for years, the only allowed organization in Syria when it came to women and feminism was the General Union of Syrian Women, that of course was, controlled by the Assad regime, and it also functioned as a state-controlled, entity promoting the government agenda and the government narrative. And it did not really, of course, it was not at all about women's right or any feminist values. And while on like global level, feminist movements in the 60s, was busy and introducing gender discourse and examining social roles. Unfortunately, not only Syrian, but many Arab, like many women in our region, were busy and controlled by dictatorships and by corrupted powers in their own countries. But that did not prevent women like Hanan Najmi, who was in the 80s still trying to work to push for legal reforms and better conditions for women and children. But let me also mention some, a woman that I know personally, Fadwa Mahmoud, is today a mother and a wife of, Abdelaziz Al-Khaya and Maher Tahan, who were unfortunately kidnapped by the Assad regime in the year 2012, a year after the start of the Syrian revolution. Fadwa was one of the women who, in the 80s, who was fighting against this dictatorship. She was arrested for years when she has her two kids waiting for her at home. She did not give up. She was still fighting against this regime. She was arrested. Many of her comrades were killed, were assassinated, but that did not stop her from fighting for her rights and for political change in the country. And Fadwa is, someone who's still fighting till today. And this is, to me, this is mind-blowing. She's still fighting despite all the challenges, all the difficulties, and all the horrors she saw. She's still fighting. And Fadwa is just one woman I know of. But reaching the moment of the revolution in Syria, I think it will take me years to talk about what women have done after the revolution started in 2011. I would say Syrian women, of course, Syrian and also Palestinian women, because we also have a huge diaspora of Palestinian women in Syria, have participated in every single level of the Syrian revolution. They were part of everything. And I would also like to mention maybe someone like Razan Zaytouni. She was a human rights lawyer. And Razan, unfortunately, she advocated and she fought for women's rights and for, everyone's rights in Syria for years before she got kidnapped by, a military group that was, an opposition group in December 2013. And unfortunately, fighting against the regime and choosing to go to a place that was under siege by the regime, and Russia and Iran did not protect someone like Razan from being kidnapped and targeted by other, extremist groups in the area. I would also like to mention someone like Fadwa Sleiman. Fadwa Sleiman was also someone who, was like one of the most famous women chanters in Syria. She participated in many protests alongside other men chanters. She was very, very famous. She was targeted by the regime. And, she just, moved from one city to another, one place to another, to be part of these protests. And she was challenging the sectarianism that the regime, has, used to shape a narrative against the Syrian revolution. And Fadwa was one of those women from a minority in Syria who just went to all Syrian cities, sang and danced and chanted with every single person, regardless of their sect, of their background. And she challenged the regime. And unfortunately, we lost her to cancer a few years ago. And today, maybe just briefly to say, today we're, it's a completely new phase. The Assad regime has fell a few months ago. And now we have a new government that, of course, is formed, by a military group, an extremist military group that also, had, ruled some part of Syria for the past years, and had also, of course, committed, huge violations, not only against women, but against activists, against all people in the area, and against even other military groups that were more moderate, I would say. And this is a very challenging, phase for Syrian women. But I would say, just to make it brief, I can talk a lot about this, but to make it brief, of course, it's a new, challenging, difficult phase. But Syrian women and other women who live in Syria, Kurdish women, Palestinian women, all women, who were inside Syria, and even those who were in exile for years, decided again to not, isolate themselves and to go to Syria. And maybe those who cannot go to Syria to fight again, and to not accept to be, isolated and put aside. And so I would say, every woman I know today in Syria and outside Syria is fighting so hard, despite all the difficulties, the suffering we've been through in the past years, to be part of the new future, to be part of a new Syria, and to not accept, to give up on everything we gained in the past years. Of course, we lost a lot, but we also gained a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much for also remembering how important it is, our collective memory, our collective calling out and remembering the names of those women and feminists who have come before us, but recognizing all around us, as you said, Wafa, that everybody is mobilizing, that everybody has a stake in what happens in Syria's future, and that they're engaged in that because they know personally how much there is to lose. So thank you so much for also calling out the names, and hopefully we can share those either in the chat or as a follow-up with the participants. Yanar, I'll come to you now. If you could talk a little bit about the rich history of feminism and activism in Iraq.
Yeah, thank you, Leila. Iraq was lucky for its geographic location, which made it among many countries where the progressive movement was up and it affected the society. The progressives in Iraq had shaped our reality to take it from our grandmother's time when they were living a very traditional life with not much rights for women to a better life in our mother's times when the progressive vision, political parties, and the culture of the society really raised a woman's status in the society. And it also happened in the same time that the Iraqi oil was nationalized by the government. So lots of oil, lots of resources, and a progressive movement. And women were encouraged to work, where almost 40% of the workforce in Iraq was female. So when you look at it in that sense, we had resources, women had their economic independence, and a strong progressive movement. And it also led, after the World War II, the personal status law was beginning to get drafted, and then it passed in 1959. This law gave women a very good threshold of women's rights in marriage, in divorce, in custody of their children, and a woman was treated as a what you call as an individual in front of the court, not just as somebody who is a follower or belongs to a husband. And this was a major change in our reality in Iraq. So the personal status law was that change maker in women's rights in Iraq. And unfortunately, after a 2003 occupation that came in the name of democracy and rights for women, our reality was given over to the religious parties, to the sectarian parties, who have been at their attempts to take away our rights one year after the other. There was first an attempt in 2000, end of 2003, to switch us to Sharia law. And then there was another Ja'fari law, and then trying to take away custody of women for their children if they get divorced. So the attempts continued, and they finally bore fruit this year in 2025 in January, when the Iraqi parliament decided that the personal status law will not be applied for the half of the women's population under the Shia Muslim identity, because they will be dealing with their Sharia. So after 22 years of occupation and so-called democracy, and after 65 years of having basic human rights for women in Iraq, we wake up 3 weeks ago, and the head of the parliament has given his order that the personal status law was undermined, totally undermined. So our rich history here manifests itself. We in AWFI, besides 5 other organizations, got together and decided we will have a coalition that we call 188, because this personal status law is number 188. And we decided that we will defend our right to have a law that protects us in the face of the Iraqi parliament that was imposed on us by this occupation and still is being imposed on us. So Coalition 188 was put together in last June, and currently has more than 400 organizations, and I would say more than 2,000 individuals. And we are challenging the government that they cannot go on like this, that they were brought forward by the American occupation, and that they cannot take away women's rights. The rich history does manifest itself in this way, but I mean, we still have a long struggle to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanar. And thank you for pointing out that one of the key areas of activism in Iraq, but also in other regions, has been around personal status laws, family codes that impact who women can marry, child custody, inheritance, and a range of other issues. And also highlighting the way that democracy has been used in ways that really have undermined the rights of men, women, and society at large. So thank you for that and pointing that out. Siwar, I'll come to you now.
Thank you. There is, of course, a lot of similarities, but some differences. I also relate to what Wafa was mentioning about the state feminism. I think that's something that we share as well in Tunisia. I think the first thing that I always need people to understand is that the first feminist movement in Tunisia did not really begin with legal reforms. It began with resistance. Women fought against French colonial rule. So self-determination is a feminist issue, even though people would use the word feminist differently, but at least for people, for me and for many feminists who come from Tunisia, self-determination is a feminist issue. And women, the first feminist movement in Tunisia actually started by fighting against the French rule, at first as fiercely as men, risking their bodies, their families, their futures, everything. They were, and also, this as well in Algeria, of course, that's also the same. So they were not just supporting, the struggle, they were shaping it, strategizing, leading. And, but of course, when the independence comes, and this is something that just happens a lot, is that when we're looking at history, how it's written, a lot of these amazing achievements and contributions are not written adequately, at least to give a sense, the sense. I would name some Tunisian feminist activists like Durra Mahfouz, Ilham Marzouqi, Amal Mahfouz, Sonia Ben Ashur, and other Tunisian feminist militants, activists, founders of feminist autonomous movement and researchers. They condemned the invisibility of the Tunisian women's rights movement efforts. Historically, women have always been strongly involved in popular movements and demanded independence from colonial rule, and later fought for democracy and social economic rights. So this is something that has always been part of the history of Tunisia. There's Bshira Mnemrad, a Tunisian women's rights activist. She founded and led the Muslim Union of Tunisian Women from 1936 to 1956. Ben Murad ensured that the mobilization of women to join the national independence movement and the creation of women's spaces to voice their issue under colonial rule. Just also for our Western audience to know that this is a Muslim union of Tunisian women, and this is completely contrary to whatever stereotypes that would be thought about Muslim women, but rather actually they were women, Muslims, and feminists, because the two words can coexist actually in the same phrase and coexist a lot. So there's also a lot of women who at that time, they pursued education, in France. We can also note the gynecologist Tawhida Bashikh, and here I want to really say that abortion has been legal in Tunisia since 1973. So abortion rights are legal, it's publicly accessible in Tunisia, which is sometimes when I mention this in Western or global North places, people are shocked, but actually there is the reality that continues to be. I also would like to say that, to finish that, in 2014, after the revolution, the feminist movement has ensured that even in the language in the constitution, it was in the beginning phrased as women are complementary to men. Everything stopped, all the negotiations in the parliament, until we made sure that it's written in the constitution that women and men are equal. That would be, I would end with that.
Thank you, Siwar. And just to reinforce the point that you made, Tunisia liberalized its abortion law before Roe v. Wade, which has now been overturned, as you know. And so there's been a very, very dynamic mobilization around sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice in the region, and notably in Tunisia, as well as all kinds of activism on women's rights issues, more broadly defined. Siwar, I'd like to come back to you to talk about some of the work you're engaged in regionally. And Yanar, you mentioned, I think, very well that our countries, or maybe it was Wafa, our countries, the way that they're constituted now are because of colonial rule and the ways that colonial powers divided our regions. And so our people are across regions, and they're diverse, as we've all said, and there's incredible mobilization across the regional level. There's feminist schools, there's feminist networks. And I'd like you, Siwar, to talk a little bit about what those look like across the Maghreb, across North Africa, as well as on the regional level.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that now feminism in the region, or let's say I also would like to be very careful about language, right? Because not everyone names themselves as a feminist, but doesn't mean that they are not. It's actually one of the resistance is one of the most radical forms of feminism, but also because in language it could be seen as like it's a Western import, or like also very aligned with white feminism, which is a lot of differences between global South and white feminism. But generally in the region, like there is a lot of work that is like on economic justice. Actually, I would really want to emphasize this point that this is a global issue. This is not only for our region. When we talk about women working inside the houses and outside the houses, this is an unpaid work. So majority of women would work in informal jobs, agriculture, domestic work, factory labor, and they really employ a large percentage of women in the region working in these sectors. But these jobs come with no protection, no contracts, no social security. And so there's also, I want to mention also pregnancy being as a financial risk. I think this is also in the US. So it's not really particular to our region, but there's a lot of the protection for that period of time of pregnancy and taking care of the kids, etc. It's also a challenge, but there's a lot of movements in the region who are really calling for economic justice for women, caring for children. That is still considered women's work, but childcare services are either unaffordable or non-existent. But for our region, we have, again, a very strong community sense. So we rely on each other in that sense for women to be able to at least, rely on her mother or her sister, or so that's something that we have in our culture. We're also, economic justice is really a feminist issue, and I'm really happy that feminist movements around the region are demanding labor protection, access to affordable child, and end to pregnancy discrimination. There's a lot of work on gender-based violence that it's really notable. I want to mention that Tunisia have passed Law 58 in 2017. I really encourage people to look at that. This is a groundbreaking law that criminalizes all forms of gender-based violence, including domestic abuse, marriage rape, workplace harassment, and political violence against women. And this is actually seen as one of the most progressive laws in the whole world. Of course, the laws does not translate to implementation. So there's if there's something that I learned throughout my work is that we do everything for laws to be made, but we need to look at the lived experience of women and let them tell us what they are experiencing. I really enjoyed a lot, in my work, there's a lot of work on, it could be from funding shelters and long-term support for displaced, but also there's a lot of work on trying for government accountability to ensure that these laws are implemented. I would like also to mention that there's a lot of work on body autonomy that I'm really happy to witness. There's initiatives on sexual education that we never had before that's happening in Arabic to speak to not only women but queer people to feel that. And I want to mention that, for our audience, is that we are all Homo sapiens and humans, so queer people exist equally everywhere in this world. So we do have queer people in our countries as they are in everywhere. So there is a lot of work, because sex education is not really in schools, for example, in Tunisia publicly. So there's a lot of work from civil society working on that. I also would like to mention like art as a great way of feminists evolving ideas. The revolutionaries, the feminists, the human rights defenders, the artists, the poets, they are like shooting stars, and they are really ensuring that we are continuing to bring the joy in this revolutionary process. Revolutions and processes of change takes years and years and years and years. And while working with activists, I know at least that these people who are activists, they don't really even think about their lifetime, which is most beautiful thing. They do things that they know that they will never even be like alive to witness, but they do their part. And I feel that I also have this responsibility of, I wouldn't call it responsibility, but a heritage that I'm carrying from generations of feminists before me who've done so much for me to go to school, for me to be able to wear whatever I want, for me to be as free as I can be. And so when I witness also the younger generation, and I'm happy that you're mentioning feminist schools because we have one as well in Tunisia. And so when I see the feminist school and when I see the younger generation, I am so happy to see that, you know, the work that we're doing is really hard. It's a lot of pain, but it's also, we see the results. We see it literally in people, next generations, where like few other things that took us forever to like liberate ourselves from, they already have it. So it's a joy to see things change, honestly. But no one should have to carry this fight alone. We should hold the fire together, everyone. And liberation is just not about tearing down what oppresses us. It's about imagining and creating something better. And I truly think that we are in a crisis of imagination. And so I feel like the more we imagine and we ping pong to each other ideas that are out of what we are like programmed to think, the better as a collective we can raise our own liberation as a collective.
Thank you so much, Siwar. So much interesting food for thought in terms of both how how we think about feminism. I think that first question, and what it means to work on women's rights issues, but not necessarily identify as a feminist. And then the incredible groundbreaking work that Tunisian feminists and women's rights activists have done around redefining work, redefining collective care, the GBV law. If you could please share that in the chat, Siwar, so that we can share it with our audience. Those are all important, as well as the crisis of imagination. I think that's something that, if we have time, it would be really interesting for others to address as well. I'm going to come to you, Wafa, about how you also see, I mean, you've spoken so richly about the history, about different critical points in the Syrian history for women's groups and feminists, and now the current moment that you're in. If you could kind of lay a framework for what you see as some of the critical issues that women's rights groups are mobilizing around, specifically around women's rights, as well as collectively the right of the disappeared and others. Thank you.
Well, I mean, you know, first I just wanted maybe to say something as like
please
just,
go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Siwar was just, you know, talking about, because this conversation about mental health and healing, and like, I think is a very, very tough conversation on a personal level for me, but I also think for many women. And I was just reminded of I think it's a book by Yahya Salam. She's an Egyptian feminist writer who wrote a book called, I think, even the Finest of Warriors. And it's a book about I think she actually interviewed women activists from Egypt and from Tunisia, and it's about mental health and healing. And I think, you know, that's you know, I'm living, especially that living in the West, you know, and being an activist, you know, or being someone trying to do whatever for somewhere in the South, makes this whole conversation about healing and mental health very, very difficult, because it's there is something very, very, I would say, like, there is something to me very annoying about this conversation, having it at least in the north. And yeah, I think that's I was just reminded of that book, and I think it's a good read. It's a difficult read for those who are struggling to I don't know, heal. But this also takes me to the to your question about the challenges. I think, to be honest, after I mean, of course, Iraq has experienced this for decades, but like also after more than a decade of just continuous war, of all levels of we've witnessed intersectional crimes of you have someone, you have a family member kidnapped or disappeared, and then you also have to flee the country, and then you also have to just establish a new life in a new country and all of that, and then still fight for the cause or for the country or for your loved ones, and then it's very, very exhausting. And I think to be honest, the moment the Assad, they announced that the Assad has fled the country, I for a second, for just a second, I thought that like this is the moment for me to start a healing journey, because the past few years have been very, very difficult. And then of course it took me a second to also remember that my father is somewhere between life and death in Assad's presence, and I just now a new journey has to start, because I have to just go to Syria and find him. Unfortunately, I went to Syria a week later, and I had to go through the journey of just scouting and exploring and wandering around prisons and detention centers and hospitals and morgues, looking at dead bodies to identify my father. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any information. So we're again in the same, like for years we said that like the Assad's prisons are like a black hole. And yes, the black hole is open today, but it seems like now, there is another level and another fight we have to go through. And I think that is one of the main challenges, because yes, on the one side we have this whole fight for for women's rights, for for our rights in Syria, for shaping the country's constitution, for shaping the country's future. But at the same hand, at least for me and for many other Syrian families, we still have to fight for truth on daily basis. And you're fighting for truth with a government, a new government that is not very, very, very dedicated and not very interested in finding the truth about a crime they themselves committed against other people. So I would say, at least, and I like, I'm going to Syria in 2-3 days, and I would say that's, at least to me today, that's one of the main challenges. We're trying not to again isolate ourselves, but we're fighting for we're fighting. Like few days ago there was the some sort of national conference that to many of us seemed like a theater play that was just supposed to happen. We were not really included. People were invited just the day before the conference. Women participation was just at its minimum level. And all talks about forming committees to write the constitutional declaration, or to think of this the future, like the future of the country seems to be very, very limited to certain to certain figures with certain tendencies and political tendencies. And unfortunately, women on daily basis in Syria are still going to these places, fighting for their place, fighting for the margin that for years we fought for with the Assad regime, but we still have to fight for again today. And I would say just maybe one thing about when it comes to the disappeared, I think again one of the main challenges today is that you have countless, like I mean, you have thousands of families of only women, because the men were arrested, killed, or maybe, killed under torture, or in, like, in clashes or whatever. So you have a huge number of women only, like families, just of women who today have to also struggle in a country that is, that is devastated economically, politically, and socially. So I think, that's a very, very, at least to me, I think that's one of the main challenges.
Thank you so much, Wafa, so much. And our heart goes out to you. And we hope that when you go back to Syria, you will be able to find your father. And I think you raised a lot of important points about what happens when men have disappeared and what happens in women-only communities. What does healing look like? What does truth and reconciliation look like? How do we heal the wounds of these very real struggles, and what that looks like in different contexts? And I think the piece on mental health and collective care and wellness is so important in healing. I wanted, Yanar, to ask you, and just to bring this conversation a bit linked to the othering and belongings framing and institute, because in the check-in that we had, Yanar, you said it was so important to think about what it means to belong, and how so many of us with hyphenated identities don't belong fully in either place we're in. If it's our countries of origin, if it's our countries of adoption, if our countries where we've immigrated, like my family. And I'd like you to address that question, and then we'll come to some of the questions that were posed in the chat.
I'd like to start with the idea that as a feminist who's critical of the situation that surrounds her and her family, you are always othered. You are always silenced and told that, why are you not part of our community? Why are you subjecting to everything that we say? And then you come to the West, when you say the same things, they tell you, why are you making us look bad in front of the Westerners? Again, you are othered. And I went back home and set up this organization, and I thought, okay, my goal is women's freedom. And it turned out that this concept was an atomic bomb by itself. When you sit among Arab communities and Middle Eastern communities and you speak about a woman's freedom, it is totally unaccepted. The Iraqi government until now does not accept that any woman leave her family home and come save herself within a shelter. So they're not giving us legal status for the shelters. And on top of that, they have frozen our bank accounts because they say that this organization should not be. And today I was sent a video that shows me and other feminists in Iraq and calls us very bad names, as if we are destroying the society. But going back to your question, Leila, the way that we have been othered is partly for being feminist, but also if we think of the intersectionalities, especially when Iraq was invaded, the society was divided upon religious, sectarian, and ethnic lines, and we found that the bottom of the otherness is endless. For example, if you are a Shia Muslim woman, you are okay to be respected among your community. But if you are a Sunni woman whose political bloc is not ruling in the parliament or not strong, because the Americans chose to empower the Shia Muslim bloc, then you are less than the Muslim Shia woman. And then again, if you are a Christian, you should not be talking. Nobody wants to hear you. And the intersectionalities here are endless. It reaches to a Yazidi woman who was bought and sold very easily by ISIS, most of whom are Iraqis. I mean, the amount to which you can be othered and demeaned in the eyes of the society is unbelievable. And I have not spoken yet about the Black community in Iraq. If you are a Black Iraqi woman, usually in these current times, you have no education, you will be illiterate, and nobody will offer you a job, and you are harassed wherever you're walking on the streets. So the levels of demeaning women upon intersectionalities is unbelievable. So as feminists, we believe that it is our task as, let's say, the protectors of the society to protect the women who suffer from intersectionality oppression. But in the same time, within our communities, we do not acknowledge to identity politics, because once you do that, that's a big trap. It opens up and it's endless, because you have to give identities to everybody, and it turns out, according to the text written or the form, the norms that were put by your ruling political blocs, that some of us are better than others and at a higher status. So that, if I want to speak about divisions among the women that were imposed on us by the ruling intellect. But then again, if I speak about the networks of women that are around the country, and specifically in Iraq, because I know more about it, there are the networks that are try to be feminist, although they are still analyzing some of the deep-seated discrimination that they have against other religions or ethnicities. And we found that out during when ISIS enslaved Yazidi women. I was surprised to find out that many of the feminists that I really respected, they did not defend the Yazidi women. And they spoke very bad words against them in a way that made me feel ashamed for being an Iraqi. So the networks some of them are on the, I would say, on the more humane side, like the network of anti-trafficking of women in Iraq, which Aufi plays partly leadership of. And there are, again, the state feminist networks that work with the government, like the 1325 network. And there are those who consider themselves progressive, but they are very far behind on feminist issues. So there are all kinds of feminism networks in Iraq. And here, my last point is about the government, Iraqi government, that has shared its information with other right-wing governments around the world. And they have started an anti-rights and anti-gender campaign. And they even do not allow us to say the word gender publicly anymore. And they brought forward legislation where if you are not a man or a woman, you will go to prison for 7 years or 10 years. And I'm afraid to say the words here because everything that I say goes to video clips and they make a campaign against you. So the government, besides, the right-wing governments are holding their hands with each other and supporting each other to hit and to break the feminist movement and the freedom-loving movement. It reached to a point where we had to sit down and write a statement of solidarity with the American women and the American feminists who are suffering under Trump, whose organizations can be taken away from them at any point. So a lot of feminist solidarity needs to be done around the world. Our region has some of the lessons, but we are still unable to work together as one single forum that is strong and that can stand against our governments. So a lot of work needed, and this is one of the forums where these solidarity forums can start. Thank you, Leila.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yanar. I think the point around solidarity, both at the national, regional, and global levels, and how we advance that while recognizing that we have very diverse movements and we're not going to agree on everything, but we can agree on showing up for each other and showing solidarity. So there were multiple questions that came in the chat. I'm recognizing that we just have about 8 minutes for the questions, and then we'll be wrapping up the call. But I did want the panelists to be able to address some of the questions that are around, and you raised it as well. You've all raised it in previous comments, but around intersectionality, like how we're building movements that truly are inclusive and intersectional and realize the diversity of our lived experience, our identities, and the work we do. How regional groups are supporting each other. And then there was a question around post-nationalism. So any of those questions that this panel wants to take, you can see the others as well. So if you want to address them, you can. But I'll give you each around 2 minutes to respond. I'll begin with you, Wafa.
Sure. I think, to be honest, I just want also to say something personal about intersectionality. I think that, I've always talked about how, I was named after a Palestinian news agency. So I was named Wafa because of that. And, I lived my first years in Al Yarmouk camp, which is the biggest camp of Palestinians in Syria. And, I was like my father took me to my first protest when I was 10, and that was around the second Palestinian Intifada. And then we also, the invasion of Iraq was also like, for me, at least I remember I was like 13. That was, something that, my family and the families around me lived on daily basis, and like people took to the streets every day to protest against that. And I always said, like, especially when I first arrived to Germany, and then I heard all these talks about by white activists about intersectionality and what it means and what it looks like. And I said once that it's so funny that everyone is so fascinated by these terms. And to be honest, I lived my intersectionality from the first day I was born, and I never knew that there is a term for it. I never used the term, and I never knew that, this is something that exists and that people just use to preach, right? About how should things look like. So to me, intersectionality, now that I know the term, is a very, very, I think is the main lens that I use to see everything I do. It's also, to be honest, is the practice that, helped me survive the past few years. And to be honest, and by that I mean that the fact that, at certain point, I think the situation in Syria was very, very, very desperate. And, I on a personal level, I tried every day, everything I can to save my father. And I couldn't, at some point, I really reached a point where I just, my mental health was really, really bad. And it was very difficult for me to, to just be alive. Let me just put it this way. And I was really struggling with suicidal thoughts and, but at the same time, I had to work, I had to support the family, I had to fight for my father and all of that. And to be honest, what saved me from that was the mothers of Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli occupations prisons, and the mothers of, Iraqi detainees who disappeared decades ago. The mothers of Egyptian prisoners who, I looked at, and I know that the context is very, very different. I could see the differences, but the similarities and the shared pain was what saved me from, just this helplessness. And I owe it, to be honest, to to Ala Abdel Fattah's family, to Wadat Halwani in Lebanon, who's been fighting for 40 years for her husband, for the Palestinian mothers in all historic Palestine, who've been for years, despite all the challenges, fighting for for their loved ones. And this is one form of this intersectionality that is not necessarily manifested through connections, and you know what I mean. Like, it's not that like they know of me, or they don't know I exist, but they literally saved my life. But then on the other hand, I would just want to say that also, like, throughout the past years, I think especially for groups of women, family members, mainly women of the disappeared, we connected to mothers, of Bosnia, Chile, Argentina, and of course mothers and women of the family of the disappeared in the region. And that was, also like a lot that gave us a lot of knowledge and a lot of strength.
Thank you, Wafa, and thank you for talking about intersectionality as a practice. Siwar, can I come to you just in 1 minute, if possible, to respond to any of the questions, and then I'll conclude with you, Nanar.
Yeah, I think I want to use this 1 minute just to as for us to reflect on something. And thank you so much, Wafa, for your sharing. I resonate so much what you were talking about, intersectionality, like the language, that it's a gatekeeper, as if it's like we don't really need the language to be told to us for the concepts to exist. We've been existing and doing things and living, without naming it and labeling it, but here we are. Just wanted to say that throughout my research, I was always because my country went through a revolution, we're not gonna be brought up, the democracy and the only democracy and all of that, the language. So I wanted just to say that through my research, I really found that democracy as it is right now, and as it was introduced to Tunisia, and it's introduced to all the the countries that had revolutions in 2011. It's really from the West and was never about values. It really focuses about procedures. So for me, it's really important for us to think that Western definitions of democracy have historically focused on the elections, political processes, rather than what democracy actually does for people. And democracy should not be just about voting every few years. It should be about justice, dignity, and collective well-being. And the feminist movements actually in Tunisia and in the Arab region is really challenging this very narrow version of democracy by pushing for real structural change beyond political representation. So we might not really have answers of what is what's happening and what would happen in Syria and Tunis and whatever, because we are really, really creating our own model, and we would like to be respected to own our own future and our own land and our own culture and our own vision of how liberation is for us, because we do believe in community, and our culture is really rooted in solidarity and a lot of love in our own way. So just wanted to end by that.
Thank you so much, Siwar. Love your definition of democracy and what it should be and who it should serve. Yanar, your final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I as long as we're talking about democracy, I always had a dilemma figuring out how we can have democracy when right next door there was a genocide of tens of thousands of people being killed, women losing their children for no other reason than being Arab Palestinian, and for being blamed for the political conflict that they are not responsible of. And in the same time, looking to the other side of the world where Afghani women lost all their rights altogether. They cannot even exist in the society, in the public forums, just because somebody decided to invade Afghanistan. Then leave it up, wrap it up, and leave it for them. So when you look at these two sides, and then you look at the American women and how they feel sick to their stomach every time they turn on their news and they see their president and what he's doing, how he's aborting all American women's rights, I feel that the feminist struggle is a global struggle where we should be holding hands. We should be creating our forums and build our strengths in way that where I will not say that we cannot overcome. We will overcome, but when we will overcome, that is the question. How to build these forums, how to build our strength, and how to bring the humane society around us to to regain our realities, the realities that we deserve, I think it's our responsibility, Layla.
Yes.
It's feminists like us who should have the first say about our future.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yanar, Siwar, Wafa. Thank you so much for your rich contributions, your rich analysis, sharing from the heart, sharing from the mind, sharing from the soul. It was an incredible conversation. It's obvious that many more are needed, but just want to thank you all so much for the insights that you shared and for your contributions to this important conversation. Basima?
Thank you so much, Layla. Thank you so much, Wafa, Siwar, Yanar, and again, Layla, for this incredibly rich conversation. You wrapped it up perfectly, Layla, in your closing comments. And I just deeply appreciate all of your words, your perspectives, your experiences, and the work that you're doing in the world. And as you said, Yanar, this is a global struggle. It's not just an Arab woman struggle. It's not just an Arab feminist struggle. It's not just a US struggle, but it is a global struggle, and we are all a part of it. So thank you again. We're at time, and in closing, I just want to make a brief announcement about some upcoming events that we have that are part of the Global South Lab. The next series, the next event in the series is on April 8th, same time, which is going to be focused on Arab women and feminists in knowledge production. So focusing on the role of women and feminists in arts, cultural expression, education, in advancing social progress in the Arab region. We have another event on April 23rd, which is in recognition of the 70th anniversary of the Bandung Conference, and that's going to be a panel conversation with speakers from the Global South. And the last webinar in this series will be on May 6th, focused on the critical role of Arab women and feminists in the struggle for climate justice, land rights, food justice, and sovereignty in the Arab region. And lastly, this recording will be available on the Othering and Belonging Institute's website, as well as on the Global South Lab website that will be publicly released in the coming week. So you can look forward to all of that, and you'll receive more information through emails if you're signed up to OBI's listserv, and we'll continue to publicly announce the series and information for them. We hope you all enjoyed this conversation and that you'll join us for the next one. Thank you so much.